Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Illinois Environmental Council for our Lunch and Learn series After Dark. I hope you didn't hold off on eating your lunch until now. We hope these sessions will help keep our community connected and informed. We were founded in 1975 by a group of dedicated grassroots environmentalists, and since then, IEC has led issue advocacy campaigns by allowing environmental organizations to pool their resources and create a higher profile for environmental issues. Today, IEC represents more than 100 environmental and community organizations operating in the state of Illinois. If you are not already a member of IEC and are able to give, please consider joining today by using the link in the chat box. My name is Samira Hanessian, Energy Policy Director with IEC, and I am excited to welcome all on the line to today's Lunch and Learn After Dark, the hype about an Illinois hydrogen hub. Moderating the chat for us today, we have my colleague Paloma Campillo, Digital Engagement Manager with IEC. I'd like to note a few housekeeping items before we begin. All attendees are muted by default. If you joined via Zoom, please use the chat function to ask questions, add comments, or provide resources. Time permitting, we will take live questions at the end of the session. So for today's session, we are very pleased to have Dulce Ortiz and Lauren Piette. I've had the pleasure of working with both Dulce and Lauren through the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, and I would like to share their bios with you all, beginning with Dulce. So Dulce Ortiz is one of the co-founders and co-chairs of Clean Power Lake County, CPLC, and for a decade, she worked tirelessly for a just transition of the Waukegan coal-fired power plant, which was taken offline in June 2022. Dulce brought national attention to Waukegan's coal ash ponds and legacy coal ash ponds and has testified before both the US and Illinois commissions on civil rights. Dulce has been actively involved with the nonprofit sector and has dedicated her time to serve as a board member of many social, environmental, business, health, and governmental organizations. Most notably for this group, in 2020, Dulce was appointed by Governor J.B. Pritzker to serve on the Commission on Environmental Justice, and most recently this year, she was appointed to the Governor's Hydrogen Economy Task Force. We're so happy to have you on the line, Dulce. Next, I have Lauren Piette, who is a Chicago-based attorney with EarthJustice, a public interest environmental law firm where she works to accelerate the transition to 100% clean, pollution-free energy. Lauren also facilitates the hydrogen work group of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which is working to ensure that any hydrogen projects in Illinois involve only hydrogen that is truly clean and used in appropriate sectors, and not to add harms in environmental justice communities. And with that, I will share my screen with the presentation slides and pass the mic over to Lauren. Okay. Lauren, feel free to begin whenever you're ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samira, and good evening to everyone else who's attending. As Samira said, I'm an attorney with EarthJustice and also facilitating the hydrogen work group of the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition. So joining you today in both of those capacities and really excited to be here. We're talking about the hype about an Illinois hydrogen hub, what's being proposed and the risks and benefits it could present to your community. I'm going to kick things off, pass it over to Dulce about midway through, and then you'll end with me and we can go into Q&A. So go ahead, Samira. Okay, so I promise I will give you all a roadmap slide that will lay out what's happening in this presentation, but I did want to give kind of two introductory slides just to set the stage of what I'm hoping we can all get out of this presentation today. So first off, the goal from my perspective is to provide information about hydrogen and the potential Illinois hydrogen hubs that you can use to learn about and hopefully influence any hydrogen projects proposed for your communities. And a quick note, you'll see H2 in parentheses there. That's just the shorthand for hydrogen. So you'll see that a lot in these slides. It just means hydrogen. what could hydrogen mean for Illinois? I think a lot of you are probably joining this webinar in hopes of getting an answer to that question, so I didn't want to bury the lead. Let's just get some quick answers up front. First off, hydrogen projects are very likely coming to Illinois, so we should be bracing ourselves for them. Why is that? There is tons and tons of federal money on the table for hydrogen projects. Truly billions of dollars in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. And all of that federal funding has attracted a tremendous amount of political support for hydrogen projects. Illinois is no exception. We have a lot of important politicians who are supporting hydrogen projects in the state. So all signs are pointing towards Illinois getting some hydrogen projects in the near future. And those projects could be good, bad, or most likely some combination of both. In terms of the potential good, I just mentioned the influx of federal funding that's possible, billions on the table, and Illinois could get some part of that. Money coming into the state is, generally a good thing. Probably some new jobs, maybe temporary, maybe permanent, I don't know, but it's likely that some of these hydrogen projects will require creating new jobs in Illinois. And then less of some pollution, and emphasis on some. We'll talk a lot about this in the next several minutes that we're together, but know that hydrogen projects do provide the promise of some pollution reduction, but importantly not all. And that gets us into the potential bad. So depending upon how hydrogen is produced and used, hydrogen projects could actually produce more pollution, more of some pollution. That's a big bad outcome from hydrogen projects. In addition, for Illinois, hydrogen and kind of all the attention and hype around hydrogen could distract us from better climate solutions. Oftentimes, if direct electrification is an option, it's going to be better than using hydrogen. That's related to this next point, that hydrogen use is generally pretty inefficient, so an inefficient use of our state's resources in certain instances. And these last 2 points, hydrogen projects could, depending upon how they take shape, be a lifeline for fossil fuels in our state, including through creating new pipelines. Just this key point here at the bottom, depending upon how it's produced, used, and transported, hydrogen could be environmentally beneficial or environmentally disastrous for Illinois. And I'm going to emphasize that point throughout this presentation. It all comes down to the project details. And to know whether hydrogen is going to be good or bad, you got to ask a lot of questions. Okay, here's the promised roadmap. So first off, overview of hydrogen and the Hydrogen Hub program. Second, what could an Illinois Hydrogen Hub look like? Third, how could an Illinois Hydrogen Hub burden or benefit your community? And Dulce is going to take on that piece. And then what information must be included in the Hydrogen Hub application about community impacts and engagement? And by the time we get to that point, I hope that little subhead will make some more sense to you. All right, topic 1. So what is hydrogen? It's a colorless, odorless, and highly flammable gas, so hard to detect and easy to light. It's been used as a fuel or feedstock in certain sectors for a long time. In particular, the chemical fertilizer sector, oil refining, methanol production. So even though it's being hyped a lot right now, almost like it's a hot new thing on the market, hydrogen has been used in industrial sectors for a while. The reason why it's being hyped right now is because it has the potential to replace some fossil fuel use. And again, emphasis on potential there. It can be produced and used in several different ways. So let's get into that. How is hydrogen produced? All right, so hydrogen is often referred to by different colors. There's kind of a whole color wheel and color spectrum of hydrogen. And some of you might know that this color wheel is like falling out of favor in certain circles and in favor of some other terms, but I think it's really important to know what these terms refer to because they're still used by a lot of hydrogen project proponents and just in kind of general parlance talking about hydrogen. So I'm going to use the color coding system tonight. So first off, green hydrogen. That is made using 100% new or surplus renewable electricity, where renewable electricity splits hydrogen from water molecules, H2O, through a technology called electrolysis. And that process does not emit CO2. There's a really important point here about new or surplus renewables. And this gets into a really wonky concept, but I'm going to try to give a really overly simplified example. So imagine that there is a solar farm in Illinois, and in 2023, 100% of that solar farm is 100% of the solar farm's clean energy output is going to our power grid for electricity in our homes. And then in 2024, a green hydrogen producer comes along and says, you know, solar farm, I want to buy all of your clean energy next year. So in 2024, now we have a gap on our power grid that's the size of what the solar farm used to provide in 2023. And currently, based on kind of where our grid's at today, it's most likely that that gap would be filled by fossil fueled power plants. So even though the green hydrogen producer gets the clean energy from the solar farm, our grid gets dirtier as a result. And that's really the key reason why new or surplus renewable energy sources are a really critical part of this green hydrogen kind of calculation. It's not enough to just use renewables. They really need to be new or surplus to make sure that we're not diverting our existing clean energy resources from where they're already being used and then creating new fossil fuel emissions in the process. So wonky concept, but it's really important. So I wanted to take a minute to explain that. Key point here is that Illinois should prioritize green hydrogen above all other types, but even its use should be limited because it's inefficient, among other reasons that we'll discuss later. Pink hydrogen. So pink hydrogen uses the same technological process as green hydrogen, electrolysis, but instead of using renewable electricity, it uses nuclear energy to split the hydrogen from water molecules. Like green hydrogen production, this process does not emit CO2. Also, like green hydrogen production, the surplus requirement is really important for the same kind of reasons we just discussed. And pink hydrogen is particularly relevant for Illinois because, as you all probably know, we have a lot of nuclear plants here. And we also know that the owner of those nuclear plants, Constellation, formerly Exelon, really wants to get into the hydrogen game. So pink hydrogen is something we should all become pretty familiar with here in Illinois. And then the last hydrogen production type I'm going to talk about tonight is fossil hydrogen. And there are kind of two subtypes here. There's in reality a whole bunch of awful ways to make hydrogen through fossil fuels, but I think the two most common ones are referred to as gray hydrogen and blue hydrogen. So gray hydrogen is made from fossil gas, methane, also colloquially known as natural gas, through a process called steam methane reformation. This process is dirty. It emits CO2, it emits local pollutants. It's bad. It is a bad deal for people on the planet. Blue hydrogen is the same process as gray hydrogen, so using fossil fuels and steam methane reformation. But what makes it different is slapping on carbon capture and sequestration at the end. So like gray hydrogen, it's dirty, bad, climate pollution, local air pollution, bad. And CCS, carbon capture sequestration, presents its own set of environmental concerns, which are beyond the scope of our presentation tonight, but important to note. So the key point here is that Illinois should never support or subsidize the production or use of gray or blue hydrogen. and just one other note here. As of now, folks who are a lot more politically plugged in than I am have basically gotten a sense that Illinois is unlikely right now to really support or subsidize fossil hydrogen production here in our state. That's a good thing, but I do think we should all be vigilant and keep our eyes out, because fossil fuel companies have every interest to keep their products and infrastructure online and making them money. So they also have the incentive to lobby accordingly. So I think it's a good thing that it doesn't look like right now Illinois is super excited about fossil hydrogen, but we should all keep our eyes and ears open. So if you ever see a hydrogen project that mentions fossil fuels, using them, mentions steam methane reformation, or mentions carbon capture and sequestration, little alarm bells should be going off in your head. Next slide. Okay, so how could hydrogen be used? We just talked about production, bunch of different kinds of production methods. There's also a bunch of different ways to use hydrogen. Some of them good, some of them bad. So potentially good uses include, first of all, green hydrogen. Again, important to specify the type of hydrogen. Could reduce carbon dioxide emissions and certain other pollutants from sectors that currently use fossil hydrogen. Again, that's gray or blue hydrogen. For example, chemical fertilizer production. I mentioned a few minutes ago that industrial sector uses a lot of hydrogen today. So replacing that fossil hydrogen that's currently in use with green hydrogen could produce some real environmental benefits. Hydrogen could also be used in hard to electrify sectors that don't have viable pathways for direct electrification today. Some examples: steel manufacturing, long-haul aviation, and long-haul marine shipping. But then there's a whole bunch of potential bad uses too, and those are uses that could extend our dependence on fossil fuels, harm communities, and be an unwise investment due to electrification alternatives that already exist. Examples are combustion in power plants, gas for heating and cooking in our homes, fuel for passenger vehicles, and most trucks and buses. And I know I'm going through this kind of quickly. Dulce is going to talk about this in a few minutes too. So you will hear some version of this information and more in just a few minutes. Okay, on to the hub program. So first of all, there are no hydrogen hubs yet. I don't want to mislead anybody. The Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub program is a new federal program that was created by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It's administered by the US Department of Energy. And essentially the hubs are, or will be, a network of hydrogen producers, users, and connective infrastructure. So connective infrastructure means basically anything that could get hydrogen from the producer to the user. Could be pipelines, could be trucks, could be something else. There is $8 billion in federal funds for the Clean Hydrogen Hubs program. And we know that DOE plans to make $7 billion of those funds available during this first round of funding. We also know that DOE expects to have award 6 to 10 hubs across the country during this first round. And just a quick note that those hubs are probably not going to all look the same. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law creates some specific requirements that basically demand some degree of diversification and differentiation among the hubs. So not all the hubs are going to look alike. One of the hubs needs to demonstrate production of hydrogen from nuclear, for example, and that's the hub that we expect Illinois to be going for. In terms of the timeline for the Hydrogen Hub program, applications are due this April, so very soon. And notice of selected hubs is expected to come out in fall 2023. DOE expects to award funding across 8 to 12 years and expects that if the hubs are funded through, I should have mentioned there, this funding will be allocated across 4 different phases of the hub program. And if a hub gets funding for all 4 of those phases, DOE expects the hub to operate past that 8 to 12 year award period. So that's some sense of the timeline. Okay, what could an Illinois hydrogen hub look like? So first off, who would be involved? Illinois is part of an alliance applying for a Midwest hydrogen hub that goes by the name MACH2. And DOE encouraged MACH2 to apply to the hydrogen hub program, so we know an application is coming. And again, those are due in April. MACH2 includes private and public entities in Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, and Wisconsin. And some of those entities are listed here. It includes electric utilities like Ameren, ComEd, Exelon, Constellation. In fact, Constellation and its nuclear plants are at the heart of the Illinois hydrogen hub plans. Alliance members also include gas utilities like Nicor and Ameren, and Air Liquide, for example, a hydrogen producer and pipeline company. So this is just a small sampling. I want to make clear there are other entities in the hydrogen hub mix. There's national laboratories, public agencies, public universities, but I really wanted to highlight these because I think with a lot of the hydrogen hype, you kind of mask the fact that there are some really, really big, important fossil fuel players at the table making plans and influencing plans for hydrogen projects, including in Illinois' MACH2 hub. And so again, this is not a full list of the hydrogen hub participants, but I think it's really important to note that some of the key players who are at the table are not exactly climate champions, or at least what I would consider climate champions. So just wanted to make folks aware of that fact. And on that point, a very recent update, as of just last week, MACH2 announced that it was merging with a hydrogen hub proposal that was being led by Indiana. And that proposal is backed heavily by BP. We do not yet know what this means for MACH2, but important to flag and keep on all of our radars. And then one last point here, which is a really important one, is that currently MACH2 and its alliance does not include any community organizations. Okay, what kind of hydrogen would MACH2 produce? So it has said as recently as last month that it would produce and use clean hydrogen, which at the time it was defining as green and pink hydrogen, which we talked about just a few minutes ago. It is a very good thing that MACH2 is not proposing to use fossil hydrogen or produce fossil hydrogen yet, with the asterisk on yet, because we, again, don't yet know the impacts of the merger with that Indiana hub proposal. So a lot remains to be seen, but it is, again, a good thing that we haven't heard a lot of hype around fossil hydrogen at this point. Even if MACH2 sticks to its guns on just clean hydrogen, only green and pink, it's important to note that there are still a lot of adequate safeguards necessary to ensure that the hydrogen will be actually clean, truly zero carbon, truly clean. And there's no guarantee that those safeguards will be in place. I don't think we have time to get into all the kind of complexities around that. It's something that the ICJC Hydrogen Work Group is working really diligently on. And if folks have questions about that at the end of this presentation, happy to get into it or by email. But there's a lot of complexities there. How would the hydrogen in a Midwest hydrogen hub be used? Well, unfortunately, we don't know. There's really been no transparency yet from MACH2 on how it plans to use the hydrogen, but we do have some insights from elsewhere. So MACH2 did recently give a presentation to the Illinois Hydrogen Economy Task Force, which again, Dulce is a member of. And during that presentation, they emphasized or flagged potential uses in heavy duty trucking, aviation, agricultural, industrial use, and energy storage. So that gives us some insight on uses they're looking at. Another source of intel comes from some ongoing negotiations concerning a hydrogen use tax credit bill here in Illinois. And I'm going to take a little brief detour on that. So this bill has been filed, it's proposed, it's filed in the Illinois House under HB 2501. And if passed, it would create a tax credit for using zero carbon hydrogen. We understand that some version of this bill will pass before April because bill proponents see this as a really important part of the Mach H2 hydrogen hub proposal. So we know some version of this is coming. This is again an area where the ICJC hydrogen work group is deeply engaged, and there are a lot of things that are deeply troubling to us about this bill, including the fact that the bill would actually, as written, provide an extra credit for hydrogen projects that are located in environmental justice communities. So there are a lot of things to really watch and be worried about with this bill. And again, our work group is doing a lot of advocacy around those issues, but I know we don't have a ton of time to get into all of that tonight. So again, if you have questions, please ask them at the end of this presentation, or I'm happy to chat by email. The upshot here for this slide is that in those conversations, bill proponents have specifically named heavy duty trucking, commercial heating use, and combustion and power plants as uses, potential uses that they want to incentivize for hydrogen. So from both of those sources, it seems we've got some indication that those uses might be part of the Illinois hydrogen hub. And some of those uses are really bad. I briefly mentioned that a few minutes ago, and Dulce will get into that again in a few minutes. Last slide here before I kick it over to Dulce. Where would the hydrogen projects be located if a Midwest hydrogen hub comes? We don't know. Again, no transparency yet on this either. We don't know where hydrogen producers would be located, where users would be located, where or how the hydrogen would be stored, how hydrogen would be transported, where water would come from for the electrolysis process. Tons of unknowns that I have not seen public information on yet. Mach H2 did highlight a potential site during its presentation to the Illinois Hydrogen Economy Task Force, the Marquee Industrial Complex in Hennepin. I don't know if that's a guarantee, and I doubt that would be the only site here in Illinois, but if you're in or around Hennepin, good to keep this on your radar. And then just one more reminder that that tax credit bill would increase the tax credit for hydrogen projects located in environmental justice communities, at least as written, which is concerning and does shed some light on potential project locations for hydrogen hub projects.
All right, thank you, Lauren. So I'm going to be covering, how could an Illinois hydrogen hub burden or benefit your community? And just some background here. I live in Waukegan. I lived in Waukegan most of my life. Waukegan is an environmental justice communities. And so when we're talking about the hydrogen hub, I want to make note of a word that Lauren used, and that's vigilance, right? We have to remain vigilant to ensure that, wherever this hydrogen hub goes, that it doesn't disproportionately impact environmental justice communities. And so with that being said, a hydrogen hub could provide environmental and or economic benefits to the communities if obviously they produce only hydrogen that is truly carbon free, which would be the green hydrogen, and also that uses the, carbon-free hydrogen only to displace fossil hydrogen or in hard to decarbonize sectors, as Lauren mentioned earlier. And third, it addresses local impacts in overburdened communities. As we know, and Lauren mentioned, hydrogen does come with some risks and potential burdens. And so, for a hydrogen project project to benefit our burning community, it really depends on the project, right? It depends on the project, and it also depends on the location of the project, which at this point in time, there is a lot of unknowns. But again, the word again is being vigilant. So some of the potential benefits of a hydrogen project obviously would be producing and using truly green hydrogen that could reduce local air pollution. Here in Waukegan, obviously, we're very familiar with that, and our community members have suffered from, having a coal-fired power plant for the last, 50 years. And so obviously there would be less particulate matter and SO2 emissions, less CO2 emissions, again, helping provide more, I would say, less fossil fuels in environmental justice impacted communities. Investments, they could provide economic benefits. And I think, when we talk about EJ communities, it's really important that whatever projects, regardless if it's hydrogen or any type of clean energy projects, that our community members benefit from it. And so, for example, here, the Mach H2 group claims that there would be approximately 4,500 construction jobs with 400 permanent positions. There would be about approximately $4 billion in construction spending and $900 million in wages. Some example projects that could provide these benefits would be a fertilizer plant that would replace fossil hydrogen with carbon-free hydrogen. Steel manufacturing plant replacing fossil fuel feedstock with carbon-free hydrogen. Also long-haul ships to replace petroleum fuel with carbon-free hydrogen fuel cells. And this was a maybe, long-haul trucks to replace diesel fuel with hydrogen fuel cells. But again, not if the trucks would add refueling stations in already burdened communities. And I think a prime example of this would be the Little Village, where they do have a lot of trucking and severe issues with the pollution that's overburdening the Little Village community at this time. Potential burdens of hydrogen projects. Again, just to repeat some of the things that Lauren said, hydrogen should not be used in gas systems for heating or cooking. It shouldn't be used for power plants, and most importantly, passenger vehicles or most buses and trucks. So I'm going to go into the specifics of why that would be bad. Minor CO2 reductions plus climate pollution from hydrogen leaks. There would also be increased NOx emissions. As we know, NOx can damage heart and respiratory functions, impact lung growth in children, increase emergency room visits for asthma, and even cause premature death. Another reason would be the safety hazards. Hydrogen is very leaky, highly flammable, and hard to detect. And it's also inefficient and costly, and usually there's often better alternatives. And last but not least, it likely requires new pipelines infrastructures that could also increase trucking. And I'll pass it back to Lauren.
Thank you so much, Dulce. And before we get into this next topic, I just want to lift up one point that Dulce just made about NOx emissions, because I think it's a very important one and it often gets lost in the conversation. You'll often hear people describe hydrogen as clean burning or a clean fuel. And it is true that when you burn hydrogen, it does not emit CO2 emissions, but it does emit NOx emissions. And in fact, there's been a whole bunch of research that has demonstrated that it actually emits more NOx emissions than natural gas, fossil gas, methane. So you could, by replacing natural gas, fossil gas with hydrogen, actually inadvertently increase the NOx emissions in a community, which would produce all of those negative consequences or risk producing those negative consequences that Dulce identified, like a higher risk of asthma, so on and so forth. So really make sure that if you're hearing about a project that proposes to combust hydrogen, you're asking questions about what they're doing to control NOx emissions, because that's a really big issue. So just wanted to highlight and raise that up. Okay. Hydrogen hubs and community engagement. And Stephen, I see your question, and I'm hoping I can get to that in the Q&A session. Hydrogen hubs and community engagement is our last and final topic. So, as I mentioned before, Mock H2, we expect to be applying for the Hydrogen Hub program in April 2023. DOE has a whole bunch of guidelines and expectations about what they want to see from Hydrogen Hub applicants. And one of those key pieces of a Hydrogen Hub application is a community benefits plan. I'm going to refer to it in these slides as CBP. That is due with the application in April 2023, and it is worth 20% of the application. That's what DOE has said. This plan has 4 components: engaging communities and labor, investing in America's workforce, advancing diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, and implementing Justice 40. I'm going to talk about each one of those components briefly. So first, DOE's expectations for engaging communities and labor. DOE makes clear that listening sessions and public notice are not enough. They expect to see Hydrogen Hub applicants relationship building, leading towards partnership, building accountability through legally enforceable workforce and community agreements. So yeah, Mock H2 needs to provide public notice and listening sessions, but it also needs to do way more robust engagement with communities. DOE says that good plans will implement a strategy to meaningfully engage traditionally excluded stakeholders and those most vulnerable to project impacts, and be two-way, meaning they will respond to community concerns and make decisions based upon them. There's a lot more in the DOE guidelines, but here are just a few key pieces that I wanted to call out. On the next component, next 2 actually, investing in workforce and DEIA, diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. DOE says good plans will fully consider the benefits and impacts that the project will have on jobs and workers across every phase of the project and across dispersed geographic areas. And again, DOE says you got to make this part two-way, respond to worker and union concerns and make decisions based upon them. Next slide. Okay, lastly, this Justice 40 component. So first of all, Justice 40, if you're not familiar with that, it's a federal initiative that basically requires for certain federal investments and programs that 40% of the funding or benefits go to disadvantaged communities. And the Hydrogen Hub program is part of the Justice 40 initiative. DOE has said here that its expectations for hub applicants, a good plan will include very specific benefits and negative impacts and opportunities for communities to engage in defining and monitoring these impacts of Hydrogen Hub proposals. Moreover, good plans are going to provide clear assessment of where those impacts may flow and the degree to which they flow to disadvantaged communities. DOE expects hub applicants to define concrete actions to maximize benefits to disadvantaged communities and minimize negative impacts, and to describe how benefits align with the community's own priorities. And DOE also calls out that applicants should work with impacted communities early and often to define the negative impacts that are most relevant to them, and to describe how negative impacts will interact with cumulative burdens in those communities, and the extent to which impacts could exacerbate existing burdens in disadvantaged communities. So leveraging this community benefits plan. I definitely do not expect you to remember or maybe even internalize all of the text I just read, but what I really hope you'll take away from that those last few slides is that the community benefits plan and DOE's guidance to hub applicants can hopefully be a pretty good and strong source of support to communities in advocating for engagement, communication, information, a seat at the table, from hub applicants. So think of that community benefits plan and DOE's expectations around it as a tool in your toolbox for influencing and learning hydrogen hub projects that might be coming to your community. I should say learning about. So again, MACH-H2 needs to create an initial community benefits plan for its application due in April 2023, and will need to report on and update that plan throughout the application project. And again, DOE's expectations for that plan could and should help environmental justice groups and other community representatives raise questions and concerns and influence MACH-H2 plans in Illinois. It could and should help hold MACH-H2 accountable to communities throughout the course of any hydrogen hub projects. And those expectations from DOE should raise concerns. If you learn that an H2 hub project has been proposed for your community, but MACH-H2 or its representatives haven't contacted you, that raises the question of who are they talking to and who are they treating as representatives of your community? So, conclusion, we talked about a lot tonight. Hydrogen is a dense concept. If there's anything that I hope you'll remember, it's these points on this last slide. Hydrogen and a hydrogen hub, hydrogen projects and a hub could be coming to Illinois backed by substantial money and political support. Those projects could be coming to your community. And again, reminder that hydrogen use tax credit bill that I referenced could incentivize hydrogen projects in EJ communities if it's passed as written. So special shout out to be kind of keeping an eye on projects in environmental justice communities. Hydrogen projects could benefit or burden your community depending upon the project details. So it's really important to ask questions and get information, demand information. And then DOE expects hydrogen hub applicants to work with communities. So if MACH-H2 wants to bring a project to your community, they should be listening to you and responding to your input. Last point here, when it comes to hydrogen, don't trust the hype. Demand project details, because as I hope this presentation illuminated, so much of the impacts of hydrogen projects will come down to those details. And that is all. Any questions? Maybe I'll take, I saw the question earlier about more on inefficiency, so maybe I'll quickly address that. I'll do my best to keep it simple, but essentially producing hydrogen requires a whole lot of energy. So when you take let's use green hydrogen as an example. When you power up an electrolyzer, you need a whole bunch of electricity to run that electrolyzer and produce hydrogen from that reaction of, separating hydrogen from the water molecules. That's a really energy intensive process. So if you're going to then take that hydrogen that you just spent a whole bunch of electricity producing and put it into a gas plant, for example, you just wasted a whole lot of energy that you could have more efficiently used directly. So if you're taking renewables to power an electrolyzer, to produce hydrogen, to put into a gas plant, you're getting about a 20% energy efficiency. Way, way better for people, planet, and an efficiency perspective to just use that renewable energy directly for electricity instead.
Thank you. This is Stephen. I asked the question. And that's what I'm wondering. I'm wondering on both ends. is it efficient to create hydrogen versus other uses of things? And on the other end, what's it used for enough to make a difference in the kinds of things we environmentalists want? And I don't quite yet understand what it's used for. In fact, I think in a way, this is just my personal opinion, this is a program created that's already funded, and it's not sure what it's going to do. So I think we need to be careful. Like you've said, you gave a great presentation in terms of really looking carefully at it all. Thank you. And maybe you can tell me a little bit more what's done with the hydrogen.
Well,
You already did, but okay.
Yeah, I happy to respond to any specific questions by email, but again, I mean, it's hard to know for sure because there's a lot of potential uses on the table. We're hearing people talk about good uses again that we think would maybe be good, which is replacing hydrogen in existing industrial processes like fertilizer production or steel manufacturing. But then there are a whole bunch of bad potential uses on the table, like putting into a power plant and combusting instead of natural gas. And I want to make very clear, I am not in any way saying we should keep natural gas online. I am saying we should be directly electrifying instead of this kind of inefficient leap to hydrogen when we could just be using renewable electricity instead. So happy to talk more about specific uses offline though, Stephen.
Thank you.
Thanks. And just want to jump in and as we're moving into this Q&A section, folks are more than welcome to put any questions or comments in the chat. I see that we have some folks chiming in, which is great. And also feel free to raise your hand and we'll have you come off mute. So I didn't see, unfortunately, who raised their hand first. We have a couple of folks, but Sally, you're first on my screen. So feel free to come off mute.
Thanks, Samira. And Lauren and Dulce, thank you. This is excellent information. When you indicate that Mach H2 will likely preference pink hydrogen, but then we know that the Indiana piece that involves BP, will it be exclusively pink hydrogen, or it favors pink hydrogen and can be some of the others as well?
Sally, that is such a great question, and I wish I had an answer. I don't yet know what that merger means. We know that so far Mach H2 has only talked about green or pink hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from renewables or nuclear. But I am not sure whether this merger would mean that there are fossil fuel hydrogen production projects on the table. And so it remains to be seen. But I think it is likely, from my understanding, that the hub will include different production processes. So, that could mean green and pink only, but it could also mean fossil hydrogen. It really depends on what comes in the application that's due in April 2023. So it'll be really important to try and get our hands on that application to learn more. And it'll all come down to what DOE decides to fund. So I wish I knew for sure, Sally, but I don't.
Thank you. And then the second part to that question is, do we have any sense of the timeline? Like, when might we start seeing these projects be constructed?
That's also hard to say. I mean, the only deadlines that or the only kind of sense of the timeline that I have is from those publicly provided deadlines from the DOE and the Hydrogen Hub program. So, the application deadline of April 2023, the notice that DOE expects to provide to award recipients in fall 2023. So my gut sense is that we're not going to see any projects being constructed before DOE announces its awards, so before fall 2023. But it's also possible that hydrogen projects will be getting off the ground regardless of the hub program, because there's so much federal money out there for hydrogen right now. So it's really anybody's guess, given the amount of money that's floating around and the amount of political support for hydrogen projects.
Thanks.
Right. And next I have Peyton, and then we'll dive into the chat.
Hi, thanks everyone for hosting this. For background, I'm finishing up my master's degree at Northwestern in energy and sustainability, so really interested in this topic. But my question is surrounding the approach to working with fossil fuel companies. And so I totally understand apprehension with working with traditional fossil fuel companies because of their track record and their potential, well, their intentions. But they have vast amounts of resources that can push the needle forward on climate goals, as well as halt climate progress if they face stiff opposition. So I was wondering if you could elaborate further on your thoughts on working with fossil fuel companies to help move in the right direction.
Totally, and that's a great question, and I'm happy to answer, but Dulce, I'd love if you have thoughts on that too. I certainly don't mean to suggest that I think there's no value in interacting at all with such a huge player in the room on a lot of these hydrogen projects. I think my point is more so that if fossil fuel companies are the biggest and loudest voices in the room, from my perspective, we are very unlikely to see meaningful climate solutions and real climate solutions that are good for people and the planet come out of hydrogen projects, because they have, as I said, a whole bunch of incentives to keep their existing assets online and their products profitable, their fossil fuel products profitable. So it's not to say that I don't think, I think we should have a silence only approach with fossil fuel companies, but I think it's really, really important to make sure that decision makers hear loudly and clearly from communities that we don't want fossil hydrogen. We don't want false climate solutions that actually just entrench our dependence on fossil assets. And we'd love to see meaningful climate solutions come from fossil companies. I hope that gets at your question a little bit, and Dulce, please chime in too.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to the word of being vigilant, right? And I think that we know that these corporations really are just after profits, regardless of who's being impacted with the pollution that they leave behind. At least EJ communities are used to that. And like you said, Lauren, it's that they hear, and I think I can address also the question by Jane in what I'm about to say. It's that community members, right? We're the ones that live in those communities where, for a very long time, just corporations have made their profits and they have left. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're in the room, that we're on the table. So for example, on the Hydrogen Economy Task Force, I'm the only environmental justice representative there. And so I would love to have more of my colleagues serve on that task force, right? But again, it's just making sure that these corporations that are trying to come up with these various projects, that they are intentional about the work that they're doing, right? So the community benefits agreement, as Jane mentioned, who is the community? For me, the community is the community members that live in that community, right? For me, it's those that have been working hard on environmental issues, such as Clean Power Lake County, and speaking to them about their projects and what our input is. That doesn't negate the fact that they could talk to also other environmental groups or elected officials. But I believe for me, it would be very important for these corporations with these projects to ensure that they're being intentional about, as Lauren mentioned, building relationships, right, with the communities that, the community members that live there, that work there, and it really will be the ones that are highly impacted by whatever project it is that they're bringing into the community.
Gotcha, thanks.
Great. Just looking at the chat here. We had one question asking to point to resources or that document the energy intensity of producing hydrogen through electrolysis. I think Gavin provided a good resource in the chat. But Doug, if you're still on the line and feel like you want more resources, feel free to reach out and we're happy to provide more information. Next, I see a question from Rick. How is hydrogen stored? If it powers a vehicle, how is it provided to the vehicle?
So, Rick, I'm going to admit that hydrogen use in transportation is sort of on the periphery of my knowledge, so I'm going to do my best to answer it, but I don't have all the details. So, hydrogen in general can be stored in tanks and often is stored in tanks, but there's also a lot of talk about like storing in underground salt caverns. It's storing massive quantities of hydrogen that potentially would be required for a hydrogen economy at the scale that some folks in this country are talking about, would require really unique geographic and geological areas that really don't exist, or at least we don't know about yet in this country. So storage is a big question. And like a lot of things tonight, comes with a lot of question marks. And then with respect to vehicles, often hydrogen is talked about as like hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So it's used in a fuel cell, which is a little bit different than some of the other potential uses we were talking about. But a big concern with hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, again, is the inefficiency, because we have battery electric vehicles that are like on the market now. They're up and running. They're becoming cheaper all the time. And a lot of vehicle manufacturers, I think even VW a couple of years ago, maybe a few more years than that, put out a statement saying that hydrogen fuel cells are just like too inefficient, super duper costly, would require massive investments in infrastructure and resources. So like I said, I'm not supremely familiar with the transportation end of things, but I know that, again, we're encountering kind of the same set of problems of inefficiencies and massive investments needed to make it a reality.
And then a question from Jane, also in the chat. Reference the hub's obligation to contact the community. In your view, is the community, local civic groups, politicians, or more so environmental organizations such as IEC, EarthJustice, Sierra Club, etc.? I think this can go to either of you, but maybe Dulce, if you have thoughts.
Yeah, I already addressed that question when I was giving my previous answer.
Okay, perfect. Then we can move on. Okay, Richard asked if IEC will keep folks posted on the open public comment periods. It's a good question. Usually we don't like post on social media the deadlines. We promote like campaigns and other progress points slightly differently. However, possibly Lauren, is there a place that folks can keep up with DCEO program updates and the mock hydrogen application process online?
That's a good question. I mean, DOE has a whole website on the regional hydrogen hubs and a bunch of long, complicated documents on their funding process. I'm not sure how accessible those are. Let me think on it, and And Samira, if I can get back to you to share with folks if there's a good resource to keep tabs on all of this, I'll definitely, first of all, I'd like to know myself, and second of all, I'd like for all of you to know. So stay tuned.
Perfect. And I definitely mixed up my acronyms. Excuse me on that. All right. So looking through the chat here, I don't see any other questions. If anyone has additional questions, though, happy to take those now, or if you ask something and I just happen to miss it, please feel free to come off mute and speak up.
I could come off mute just for a second here. I'm Stephen Sondheim again. There's many of us that are not real happy with more use of nuclear. In fact, we think that nuclear should eventually be retired and replaced by renewable. So it disturbs me a little bit that they're almost looking for a use, an additional use for nuclear with the PINK program. I just question that. And in actuality, if I'm not mistaken, I think, which I'm not in favor of, but using nuclear for direct energy rather than indirectly producing hydrogen is probably much more efficient. But I eventually don't want nuclear used, and I don't like to see excuses to use it. Thanks for listening. Thank you.
Okay, I do see we are pretty much at time, so we'll call it there. Just want to thank everyone for tuning in and joining IUC for our Lunch and Learn. The hype about a hydrogen hub in Illinois. Recordings of each session in the Lunch and Learn series can be found on IUC's YouTube channel and our website. I did hear from Lauren that she's happy to provide the slides that you all saw this evening. So stay tuned for those. And a shameless plug, our next Lunch and Learn is titled How Clean Energy Policy is Made, featuring guest presenters. Illinois Commerce Commission Chair Harry Zalewski and Illinois State Rep Ann Williams. The date for that is this coming Monday, February 27th at 12 p.m. Paloma dropped the registration link, or Ken dropped the registration link in the chat for you all. So, perfect. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you all.